Chapter 1. The Comforting Lie. AV prevents sexual crime. Society loves a simple fairy tale. Let men watch AV, the story goes, and they'll calm down. As if libido were a steam valve on a factory pipe. Release pressure, prevent explosion, problem solved. Very elegant, very wrong. This idea survives because it feels scientific without actually requiring science. It flatters laziness. It reassures policymakers who would rather fund broadband than address social decay. It comforts viewers who prefer not to think too hard about what repeated visual conditioning does to the human brain. AV does not suppress desire. It industrializes it. The claim that AV prevents sexual crime rests on a childlike misunderstanding of how desire forms. Sexual desire does not emerge in a vacuum. It grows out of trust, reciprocity, recognition, and a basic sense that another human being is not an object but a participant. Remove those elements and you do not get peace. You get distortion. AV removes all of them. In AV, there is no trust to earn, no mutuality to negotiate, no rejection to process, no emotional risk to survive. There is only consumption. The camera teaches one lesson relentlessly. Women are fragments, legs, breasts, mouths, angles, lighting, cut scenes, replaceable parts. This is not intimacy training, it is disassembly. Supporters argue that it's just fantasy. That word does a lot of dishonest labor. Fantasy is supposed to be private, elastic, and self-aware. AV is not fantasy, it is repetition. High-definition repetition, algorithmically optimized repetition, the same cues, the same scenarios, the same power imbalance, over and over until the brain stops asking questions. If AV truly reduced sexual violence, we would expect obsession to decrease. Instead, fixation intensifies. Viewers do not become calmer, they become narrower. Desire collapses into scripts, a specific uniform, a specific outfit, a specific age-coded aesthetic. Fetishism does not appear accidentally here. It is cultivated like a crop. School uniforms, office wear, lingerie framed not as clothing, but as entitlement. The human mind learns what it is fed. Feed it reduction, and it learns to reduce. This is where the lie becomes dangerous. A society that mistakes stimulation for release confuses exhaustion with satisfaction. AV does not empty desire. It trains desire to detach from reality. When reality fails to match the script, frustration follows. Not reflection. Frustration. That frustration does not evaporate. It looks for targets. None of this means desire itself is immoral. It means desire requires grounding. Real outlets exist. Regulated adult services, transparent sex work, environments where consent is explicit and transactional without illusion. These acknowledge reality. AV does not. AV manufactures fantasy while pretending it is harmless. It is not harmless. It is preparatory. So when someone tells you AV prevents crime, what they really mean is it delays responsibility. It postpones confrontation with the actual problem. Social alienation, emotional illiteracy, male loneliness wrapped in pixels and sold as relief. That is not prevention. That is sedation. If this opening chapter made you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the first sign that the fairy tale is cracking. And if you're still listening, still watching, still thinking, then do the algorithmic ritual that keeps inconvenient discussions alive. Hit like, subscribe, share this before it disappears into the noise. Chapter 2. Desire is not born ugly. AV makes it that way. Let's start with an inconvenient truth that AV defenders hate admitting. Healthy sexual desire does not begin with bodies. It begins with status, trust, and recognition. People desire those who acknowledge them, who respond, who choose them. Even raw lust usually carries a shadow of approval. You want me. I matter. I'm not invisible. This is why rejection hurts more than loneliness. Desire is relational before it is physical. AV erases this entirely. In AV, desire has no social cost, no embarrassment, no negotiation, no failure. You do not need to be interesting, respected, trusted, or even visible. You only need bandwidth. Desire becomes something you press play on, not something you earn, share, or manage. This matters more than people want to admit. When desire is detached from human feedback, it stops evolving. It does not mature. It does not soften. It does not learn restraint. It becomes static and brittle, a fixed stimulus loop. The brain stops asking, "Who is she?" and only asks, "What angle is this?" This is how fetishism grows. Not organically, but mechanically. AV does not merely reflect male desire. It trains it. Scene by scene, category by category, it narrows attraction into presets. Clothing becomes permission. Uniforms become entitlement. Context replaces consent. The viewer learns to associate arousal with symbols rather than people. This is where things turn quietly corrosive. A man who has learned to desire trust will hesitate when trust is absent. A man who has learned to desire symbols will not. When arousal is triggered by stockings, skirts, or perceived vulnerability, the presence of a real human becomes secondary, or worse, irrelevant. AV defenders panic here and shout, "Most viewers don't commit crimes." True. Most drunk drivers don't crash every night either. Conditioning does not guarantee behavior. It lowers thresholds. It shortens distance between impulse and action. AV shortens that distance. It trains the brain to skip the part where another person's interior life exists. No fear, no boundaries, no consequences, just escalation, louder, faster, more extreme. The algorithm does not reward empathy. It rewards novelty and intensity. And novelty has a problem. It expires. What happens when stimulation escalates faster than reality can match? Disappointment, irritation, a sense that the world is malfunctioning, that women are lying, that real interactions are boring, that consent is an obstacle rather than the foundation. This is where resentment enters. Resentment is not violence yet. It is the soil violence grows in. AV does not plant the seed, but it fertilizes aggressively. It teaches men that satisfaction is owed, instant, and visually guaranteed. Reality, stubbornly, refuses to cooperate. So the lie persists. It's just stress relief. No, it's expectation training. Meanwhile, societies quietly dismantle real outlets. Dating becomes transactional but dishonest. Sex education becomes moral theatre. Loneliness is mocked. Emotional literacy is optional. And AV fills the vacuum, pretending to be harmless while reshaping desire into something increasingly incompatible with human reality. If desire becomes incompatible with reality, reality pays the price. If this chapter irritated you, good. Irritation means something is resisting examination. Don't let it slide into denial. Support work that refuses to flatter you. Hit like, subscribe, share it before it gets buried under safer lies. Chapter 3. Fetish Factories. How AV Trains. Obsession, not desire. Fetishism likes to pretend it's quirky, personal, a harmless preference. That fantasy collapses the moment you look at scale. Millions of men developing the same preferences, the same clothes, the same ages, the same power imbalance. That's not individuality. That's mass production. AV does not discover fetishes. It manufactures them. The process is boringly efficient. Repetition plus reward. Show a stimulus. Pair it with arousal. Repeat until the brain stops separating them. This is not deep psychology. This is Pavlov with better cameras. Clothing is the most obvious casualty. Stockings stop being fabric. They become triggers. Uniforms stop being context. They become permission. Lingerie stops being intimate. It becomes a remote control. None of this is accidental. AV thrives on shortcuts. It strips away personality because personality slows arousal. It replaces people with symbols because symbols load faster. You do not need to wonder who she is. You only need to recognize the costume. This is why fetishism intensifies rather than resolves. Real desire adapts. It broadens. It learns nuance. It survives boredom by deepening connection. AV desire does the opposite. It collapses inward. The more it consumes, the more specific it becomes. The narrower the trigger, the louder it must be played. And then comes the dangerous inversion. Instead of I desire her, the logic becomes this should make me aroused. If arousal does not follow, irritation appears. The brain blames reality for failing the script. Women become defective props rather than autonomous humans. This is where people start lying to themselves. They claim it's harmless because it stays on screen. They claim it's private. They claim it hurts no one. Meanwhile, their perception of the world quietly warps. A woman in ordinary clothing becomes invisible. A woman in coded clothing becomes hypervisible. Attention is not neutral. It shapes behavior even when behavior does not cross legal lines. AV defenders love statistics when it suits them and ignore psychology when it doesn't. They demand proof of direct causation while ignoring cumulative conditioning. They want a smoking gun in a system that works through erosion. No single drop causes the flood. Enough drops do. This is why AV does not replace real outlets. It competes with them. Regulated sex work involves negotiation, consent, boundaries, payment, accountability. AV offers none of that. It offers omnipotence without responsibility. One trains restraint. The other trains entitlement. So when society wonders why boundaries feel weaker, why empathy feels thinner, why certain clothes provoke reactions that seem disproportionate, the answer is not mystery. It is rehearsal. Years of it. AV is not a mirror, it is a factory, and it produces fixation at scale. If that sentence unsettled you, good. Comfort is the enemy of understanding. If this series is hitting nerves that polite discussions avoid, help it survive the algorithmic landfill. Like, subscribe, share, push it into places where denial prefers silence. Chapter 4. From Screen to Street, How AV Lowers the Threshold. AV defenders love one sentence more than any other. Most viewers don't commit crimes. Correct. And irrelevant. The purpose of conditioning is not to flip a switch, it is to lower resistance, to shorten the gap between impulse and action, to make certain thoughts feel normal, rehearsed, already approved somewhere else. AV is rehearsal without consequence. On screen, escalation is rewarded. Boundaries dissolve instantly. Discomfort is edited out. Refusal is temporary or cosmetic. The narrative teaches a quiet lesson. Persistence works. Resistance is part of the fantasy. Context does not matter. Mood does not matter. Interior life does not matter. Now place that conditioning back into reality. A crowded train, a late-night street, a workplace hierarchy, a woman who looks tired, distracted, constrained by politeness. The AV-trained brain does not ask, is this appropriate? It asks, is this familiar? Most men still stop themselves. Social norms hold, fear of punishment holds, self-image holds. But the internal braking system is weaker than it used to be. The hesitation window is shorter. The imagination has already crossed the line thousands of times in high definition. This is why the release valve theory collapses. If AV were release, desire would dissipate. Instead, it sharpens. It becomes more scripted and less tolerant of ambiguity. The world is expected to cooperate with fantasies it never agreed to. This is not how violence begins. Violence begins earlier. It begins with entitlement, with irritation at non-compliance, with the belief that arousal deserves accommodation. AV does not cause crime. It makes crime easier to imagine. And what is easier to imagine is easier to justify when restraint fails. Societies understand this logic everywhere else. Violent propaganda is regulated. Gambling ads are controlled. Drugs are monitored. Repetition shapes behavior. Everyone agrees until sex enters the room. Then intelligence shuts off and denial takes over. Because admitting this would require effort. It would require acknowledging male loneliness instead of mocking it, teaching emotional literacy instead of outsourcing desire to pixels, creating real, regulated adult outlets instead of pretending fantasy is enough. It would require admitting that endless stimulation without grounding produces instability, not peace. AV is cheap governance. It keeps people busy, distracted, quiet, until it doesn't. When frustration accumulates faster than reality can absorb it, society pays the cost, not in statistics alone, but in atmosphere, in tension, in the way public spaces feel less relaxed, less trusting, less safe. That atmosphere did not appear overnight. It was trained. If this chapter made you defensive, that's normal. Defense is what people do when a system they rely on starts looking less innocent. If you want this discussion to keep existing instead of being buried under comfort content, you already know the ritual. Like it, subscribe, share it where it will annoy the right people. Chapter 5. The Real Exit. Why AV is not an outlet, but a trap society keeps asking the wrong question. Do men need an outlet? Yes, obviously. That was never the debate. The real question is why AV is sold as one. An outlet releases pressure by acknowledging reality. It involves boundaries, cost, consequence, and human presence. It forces desire to coexist with limits. That is how pressure is managed. That is how impulses learn proportion. AV does the opposite. It removes limits and calls it freedom. There is no negotiation, no refusal that stays refusal, no aging, no fatigue, no boredom, unless the viewer feels it. The product adapts instantly. The consumer never has to adapt at all. This is not an outlet. This is a feedback loop. And feedback loops do not drain energy. They concentrate it. Real-world adult services, when regulated, are blunt and honest. Money changes hands. Consent is explicit. Time ends. Fantasy collapses back into reality when the door closes. There is grounding, there is friction, there is closure. AV offers infinity without grounding, desire without closure, escalation without resolution. This is why it leaves people emptier, not calmer. So society pretends not to notice. It calls AV private. It calls criticism moral panic. It hides behind free speech while quietly outsourcing emotional regulation to algorithms. It is easier than rebuilding community. Easier than teaching boys how to process rejection. Easier than admitting that loneliness is a structural problem, not a personal failure. AV becomes a substitute for intimacy, then a competitor, then a replacement. At that point, blaming individuals misses the point. This is systemic, it is cultural, it is engineered convenience, and the cost shows up everywhere except where people want to look. In narrower desire, in louder resentment, in public spaces that feel tense instead of neutral, in endless debates about why things feel worse with no appetite for uncomfortable answers. The final lie is this: that removing AV would solve everything. No, that would solve nothing by itself. But pretending AV is harmless solves even less. The truth is boring and demanding. Desire needs structure. Men need real exits. Society needs to stop confusing stimulation with relief and sedation with health. Until that happens, AV will continue doing exactly what it does best. Not preventing harm, but amplifying the conditions that make harm more likely. If this series irritated you, unsettled you, or forced you to reconsider something you were comfortable with, then it did its job. Comfort is cheap. Understanding is not. If you want content that refuses to flatter, refuses to pacify, and refuses to lie to keep the peace, then support it openly. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Share it aggressively. Feed the algorithm something it wasn't designed to reward. Silence is how this stays normal. Attention is how it gets challenged.